Hello and welcome to the Tapestry podcast. I'm Jules, and today I'm joined by Sean Chandler and Lizzie Wharton. They've been guests before on the podcast, and it's really lovely to have them back. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell us a bit about themselves. Sean, can I start with you?
Certainly. Good evening. I'm Sean Chandler. I am a deaf musician, deaf teacher of the deaf, deaf qualified music teacher, BSL consultant, presenter. I do all sorts really, uh, but ultimately, I try to be as much of use, I guess, as possible. And where there are projects where there are deaf people involved, or BSL, or just kind of things that people want to put together, and are really kind of placing accessibility at the center of what they're doing. So there's a portfolio of stuff that I do, but keep me out of mischief, and I'm very lucky with all the things that I do. Yeah.
Thank you. And Lizzie.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Wharton. I'm a qualified BSL interpreter, and I've known Sean for quite a while. We work together on a project, and yeah, it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Sean, I'm going to start with you with a question about the importance of the words and terms that we use for deafness. How important are they, and how can they impact deaf identity?
So this is going to be a 4 hour podcast.
Yeah,
Is that
that's fine.
yeah? So there's so much terminology in the world of hearing loss, put it that way to start with, and some of it kind of comes from a construct of deafness, which is a medical model where we kind of have the word hearing impaired, um, which assumes that a baby is born with hearing loss, and the body is broken and needs to be fixed. So this construct of deafness is where there is an intensive need to fix the child's hearing loss. Um, they may or may not be put on quite an extensive, intensive course of speech therapy. They'll go to mainstream school. They won't meet any other deaf children or deaf adults. They'll be a part of what we call a hearing community, mainstream mainstream living, and they will be forever viewed as a hearing child, but with broken ears. And this construct is illustrated by the word deaf, but with no capital letters. So that's the first construct, the medical construct. To completely kind of flip that on its head at the other end of, if there was a spectrum, which I think there is actually, the complete other end of the spectrum, we have children who were born who are deaf with a capital D, and we call them capital D deaf. And this is where deafness is a celebration. This is where we have culturally deaf individuals who will learn British Sign Language. In some cases, it'll be their first language or their mother tongue. They'll go to a deaf school. They'll be fully immersed in BSL. They may have a deaf family. Their mother and father will sign to them, and they'll learn language that way through a really kind of rich, culturally appropriate signing. They'll go to deaf events. They'll have deaf friends. They won't really kind of have that many hearing friends, um, but they are completely immersed in the deaf community. And yeah, like I say, it's deafness is a real celebration, and they embrace their deafness. And particularly with social media, which I think we'll come on to a bit later, they will seek out deaf influencers. And the power of social media is that you can have deaf influencers who will set up a camera, sign into the camera, add subtitles, and all those kind of things. And deaf children and young people will seek out those deaf influencers. Um, and then, kind of relatively recently, there's a third construct which not a lot of people know about. This is the capital F construct, and it's the social model. So the first model was the medical model, which is where the body is broken and we need to fix it. The second construct, the capital D deaf, is the cultural model, deaf culture. The third construct, or third model, is the social model, and the capital F deaf, in this case the F stands for fluid, and they kind of like go between the two. So in my case, this is how I identify with my own deafness. I was born to hearing parents. They'd never thought about hearing aids, audiology appointments, ENT, ear, nose, throat departments in hospitals. They'd never kind of thought about sign language. And so I was kind of sent to mainstream school, just a local primary school in Liverpool. And I was the only deaf kid in the school, the only deaf in the village. And I'd never met another deaf person until I think when I was in year 6, my mum kind of found this deaf young man who supported Everton, which wasn't a great start. But and he could sign quite well, but we couldn't. I think it was just like, well, you're deaf, Sean, and young Philip here is deaf. You are best friends now. And it was really awkward because, he'd come round, mum would have jam sandwiches there for us, and we just sit awkwardly talking about, I don't know what we talked about really, but it was a bit weird. So anyway, yeah, so I went to mainstream school, went to mainstream things, hearing things, and then when I got to sixth form, when I was about like 15, 16, 17, I kind of started to think that there's something missing. There were hearing people who could see my hearing aids, and they would say, you are deaf because you wear hearing aids. But then there were profoundly deaf BSL users who would look at me and say, well, you're not really deaf, you're hearing impaired because you can speak really well. And with your hearing aids, you can access quite a lot through orally. So I started to learn sign language, and so now I'm fluent in BSL. I can take my hearing aids out and communicate with my deaf friends and deaf colleagues and deaf children when I lead music workshops in BSL. And then so that's in the deaf community, and then I can put my hearing aids in and be with my hearing family, my hearing friend, and my hearing wife, who's actually a very good signer now, sadly, because I used to be able to turn my hearing aids off when I'd had enough of her. But because she can sign really well, there's no escape for Sean. So pray for Sean, yes, no. Yeah, me, very happily married. I'd just like to throw that in there. Yeah. Anyway, so that's pretty much the crux of it. So there's 3 constructs: the medical, the cultural, and the social. And the social fluids is where I sit. I hope that wasn't 4 hours long. I hope that was all right.
No, not at all, Sean. Thank you. That was very clear. Very, very clear. Very, very sequentially explained as well. Thank you. I also wanted to ask about stereotypes. So what stereotypes about deafness exist and need to be challenged? And how important is it for deaf children to have deaf role models?
I think there's certainly a question around hearing people's perception of deaf people's intelligence. And I don't just mean academic. I think emotional intelligence, EQ, is something which I think hearing people don't really assume deaf people have. I think hearing people need to remember that deaf people spend a lot of their time lip reading. And when you lip read, you also are taking in the microaggressors or the micro facial expressions of people. So pretty instantly, deaf people can tell when someone is not having a great day, or when someone's, on cloud nine, or being sarcastic just from looking at the facial expressions. I'd probably say, dare I say, more so than a hearing person can. And I'm not saying that hearing people can't do that, but certainly when your whole kind of communication method is through visual, watching people, and spending more time really focusing on people. I think there's an argument to say that deaf people could probably be more at ease in kind of like identifying those things. Um, so yeah, intelligence I think is a big one. I think the biggest thing is about access. Um, if someone is in the deaf community or in deaf education, we kind of say that someone is just deaf. So we have a deaf child who just can't hear, but there isn't any cognitive delay, there isn't any autism, ADHD, or ANSD, or dyslexia, or anything like that, or dyspraxia. If they're just deaf, it's just about finding a way for them to access everything that's going on. And the problems that we have with that are that we don't have enough sign language interpreters. Um, when you have communication support workers in schools, they usually kind of only need to have level 2, level 3 BSL. If you want to be a sign language interpreter, the very minimum is level 6. We can talk about the levels of BSL, absolutely, but our interpreter this evening, Liz, is a qualified interpreter, which is above level 6. And you can't really expect a communication support worker who's only got level 2, level 3 to sign to a deaf child absolutely everything that's going on in a classroom. And even within subjects, to talk about the Spanish Armada or photosynthesis or CAD/CAM technology, it's not fair. But in terms of funding, in terms of skills capacity, in terms of staffing, it's a really difficult one. So intelligence is one thing. I think being able to say deaf people can have a really great life, as a married man, as a dad, there are some incredible deaf people that are smashing life at the moment. Fairly recently, a good mate of mine, Michael Woods, is a deaf mountaineer, and in 2026 he's going to go and climb Everest, and we think he might be the first deaf European man or deaf European person to go and climb Mount Everest. He's been training for years up until this point, and he's all set to go. He's got all the gear, and he's doing the fundraising. I'm really proud of him. So there's that. We've got deaf explorers, deaf teachers, deaf lecturers, and I think the other stereotype I would say is that deaf people can't be musicians or take part in the arts.
Mm.
And like I said before, it's just about having the right environment. Might have said on the last podcast, when you plant a seed and it doesn't grow, you don't blame the seed.
Mm.
You look at the soil, the water, the sunlight, the temperature. If you change those and create the right conditions, the flower will grow. So I think if you have access, if you have role models, if you have, probably most critically, people around the child who want to see the child do well, then those kind of glass ceilings will be banished. And I think there's another stereotype, I guess, is that I think hearing people don't really believe that deaf people can bring anything to the table. If you think of the things that when you are wanting accessibility to be at the core of what you do, you talk about time and space. You talk about one person speaking at a time, making sure that everyone's heard. You talk about not tolerating, but acceptance, and you talk about empowerment. And I think those things that are the cornerstones of accessibility are also the cornerstones of what makes a good human being.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever I've gone and I'm talking to people, to places and I'm talking to people about accessibility, there's a real kind of shared vision. There's a real determination and a real kind of, we're all singing from the same hymn sheet here to make sure that we're all coming along together. And if there isn't a deaf person involved, we might not have that spirit. But the tenacity, the resilience, and the force of will that deaf people have to have to get through the barriers that a hearing world poses to them are actually the skills that bring people together, because we know what it's like to be oppressed. That's the word we use. We know what it's like to be left behind. So when there's an opening for accessibility and for people to come along with us, we'll fully embrace that. And the results can be really uplifting and inspirational.
Thank you, Sean. You've talked quite a bit there about British Sign Language, and I wanted to ask, what is British Sign Language? And then I've got a question to both of you. What were each of your experiences of learning British Sign Language? So Sean, if you can start by explaining what is British Sign Language and your experience of learning it.
British Sign Language, language on the hands. It's an official language. That's the first thing to say. We had the BSL Act in 2022. I was at the rally in London in Trafalgar Square, and I was actually filming a documentary with a young Kurdish bloke who was at the Royal School for the Deaf in Derby. It's a Channel 4 documentary called Name Me Lawans. And we went down to London, and Lawans didn't have any language when he first came over. His cochlear implants weren't mapped correctly. He came over on the back of a lorry, all of those things with his family. But they got settled status, and he's absolutely flying now. And so in the course of teaching him BSL, which was a big part of the documentary, and following his progress in school, we saw him come to life. We saw his personality grow. We saw him engage with his family more. We saw his parents learning sign language as well, which culturally was a big shift for them. We saw him playing with his siblings. We saw the frustrations that he had just disappear. There's a really popular quote in the deaf community: "If you could sign, we would already be friends." And I think that there's a big push at the moment in trying to get BSL out there. We have the BSL GCSE, which in September 2025 is hopefully going to start, as long as Ofqual and the government and Signature can get that going, and I'm sure they will. It's just a really beautiful, rich. When I sign, I feel deaf, and that might seem like a bit of a strange thing to say, but I embrace my deafness. You know, when I've got my hearing aids in and I'm listening and I'm lip reading and I'm trying to focus and I'm getting a bit tired because I'm lip reading, and you're eating a ham sandwich at the same time as talking to me, and I've got to lip read you, and it's a bit of a pain. Whereas if I take my hearing aid out and I'm signing to someone, it's just so natural, and it feels so smooth, and it feels like we're equal in a big way. So British Sign Language is a way for deaf people to communicate with each other, and it's a way for hearing people to communicate with deaf people, because hearing people can learn how to sign, deaf people can't learn how to hear. We don't have the facility to do that. So the emphasis, in as much as we want to lip read and we want to help and stuff like that, and we want to be a part of those conversations that you're having in the staff room, at the bus stop, in the supermarket, listening to the radio, we want to be a part of those conversations, but we don't have the facility to do that. It can be really frustrating. And I think that's kind of why we have a lot of deaf people at risk of poor mental health. And that is a really worrying and just a really sobering prospect, that we have deaf people who, it's a postcode lottery. You know, wherever there are people, there are deaf people. It's not like deaf people are all in one place. There's a deaf village, believe it or not, in the northwest of England, but which isn't really a village. It's just like a social kind of like community thing. So if you are deaf and you live in an area where, not just in the school, but in the city, for example, with the powers of Zoom, with our podcast, and with the powers of social media, we're beginning to build lots of bridges, but it's really not the same as sitting across someone and having that conversation just to say hello and to check in and to just let someone know that you're there for them, and vice versa. So that is my answer, and we're really lucky to have Liz, who is a phenomenal BSL interpreter, who I'm going to hand over to just now.
Thanks, Sean. Lizzie, tell us about your experience of learning BSL.
Thank you. So I was originally a lip speaker, which is working with hard of hearing people and mouthing the words in meetings and things, because my mother was used lip speakers. But more and more, when I was out and about in the deaf community, people were signing, and I just wanted to learn. So I just went to night school. I thought I'd give it a go, and that was it. I was hooked, just loved it, and decided after level 2 that I wanted to become an interpreter. And I worked really hard. And I have to say that my level 2 teacher, just want to add that all teachers of sign language should be deaf, because there's no point otherwise. She was fantastic and really encouraging and supported me into applying for level 3. And then, yeah, I just carried on. I didn't stop from level 1, and it took about 7 years for me to become a qualified interpreter. It takes quite a long time. And I think, I'm sure you'll agree, Sean, I think that's probably why a lot of people pull out. It's expensive. You have to pay for all the courses yourself. There's not much funding from the government. So it's a bit difficult, really. And I think it would be nice if the government would support interpreter training courses more. But as I say, it costs a lot of money, and a lot of people pull out. They have families and what have you. So yeah. So that was it, yeah. And I decided to become an interpreter, and I've loved it ever since. I've met some fantastic people, been to some fantastic places, different countries, doing this job, and yeah, it's brilliant.
Thank you, Lizzie. I just wanted to ask an additional question here, which was, Sean, you mentioned about the GCSE in BSL. Do you know what level that would be in terms of, Lizzie just talked there about level 1 all the way through to level 6 and then becoming an interpreter? Does the GCSE fall in a level, do you know?
They're covering a lot of the level 1 stuff in that, and I think one of the great things is that, like, we'll have deaf children who will want to go for that. I don't know whether it's the same as, hearing children will want to do an English GCSE, but for deaf children to be able to do a BSL GCSE is wonderful. The biggest problem that we have at the moment, kind of nationally with the BSL GCSE is we don't know who's going to teach it, because we have plenty of deaf people who are what we call deaf instructors, who work with deaf children in schools, teaching sign language, and also providing deaf awareness for staff. And being deaf role models, they are deaf themselves, deaf instructors, and they are some of the best people on the planet, because they are the safe spaces. They're walking safe spaces for deaf children and young people in schools, and advocating for deaf children as well. Sadly, it's they are overworked, undervalued, and underpaid, though, which is really sad. But yet, their calling is to be a beacon of hope and inspiration to the children that they work with, because the benefits of turning up every day and showing the children that, even though we're deaf and we've got to have more resilience and thick skin, we're going to get through this. So, so we don't know. Deaf instructors who aren't qualified teachers, or qualified teachers who aren't deaf. So as Liz said before, and I fully agree with this, people who teach BSL should be deaf themselves, because you don't just teach the language, you teach the culture, you teach the history, you teach the diversity, and it's just, I just think it's the right thing to do anyway. So I think once they've got that sorted, I just hope that it won't become a thing where they'll get one of the French teachers or the German teachers to go on a 2-day course, learn the BSL, which they'll forget, and then come back to school, and then, hey presto, we can teach the BSL GCSE now. I hope it doesn't come to that, but it wouldn't surprise me, because I think everyone's kind of we don't have many deaf qualified teachers to teach this. I think I am very unique in that I qualified as a music teacher, secondary, in 2010. And then 3 years ago, I qualified as a teacher of the deaf, and I am deaf myself. So I'm open to bookings. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram. Yeah. Let me know. I'll come to your school. I don't know whether I might do it online. It doesn't matter. Probably best not to do it online. So yeah, still some work to do, I think, on that.
Yeah. Thank you both. Still on British Sign Language, I wanted to ask about what it means to have British Sign Language as one's first language, and or to be bilingual in British Sign Language and English. Sean, I wanted to ask you about that. And before we started recording, you also mentioned something about your son and how he's, I think you said, babbling with his fingers. And I don't know if you'd be happy to say a little bit about that as well, because that was really interesting.
Sure. So British Sign Language has its own syntax and its own kind of rules, if you like, for when we're constructing prose in BSL. So when I'm signing BSL, I use the BSL syntax. When I'm signing and speaking, I use something called sign supported English, which, and Liz, please do chip in, but as far as I understand it and use it, it's the same signs as BSL, but in spoken English word order. So, for example, if we were to say, there is a bird sitting outside in the tree. If we were to sign that, we would sign outside, tree, bird, sits. But as I've just said, if we were to speak it, it would be, there is a bird sitting in a tree outside. So the syntax is different. So I would do that. But when I'm talking with my son, because I want him to sign and speak, he's not deaf, but when his dad is waking up at 3:30 in the morning to be with him, which is lovely, which is great. I'm very blessed to be able to do that. I think I want him to be able to sign to me, and from across the other side of the football field, or when he's meeting other deaf pals of mine and things like that, I want him to be able to sign with them. And one of the really beautiful things that me and my wife have noticed, my wife's not deaf, but luckily and rather beautifully, she is adamant that he'll sign as well, as much as I want him to. But he started to babble with his hands. Deaf children babble with their fingers in the same way that hearing children will babble with their speech as their speech develops. But in terms of language development in deaf and bilingual children, so bilingual, or I guess the real word is bimodal. If I was bilingual, I would speak English and French. But if I was bimodal, I would speak one language and I would sign the other. But we do say bilingual provision when we're talking about schools provision, but really it's bimodal. Not to be too pedantic about that. Yeah. But yeah, and that's pretty much it. It's really nice to see Sam. When I was signing to you guys before we started the recording, I think you saw him just watching me and watching the signing, and it's the same whenever I'm signing a story to him, or whenever I'm signing to one of my deaf friends on FaceTime, and I'll have Sam, want to show Sam, want to show my 9-month-old son to the world. Um, he will sit and just be in awe of Daddy waving his hands about, and it means something. So it's a really beautiful thing to see. It's my first time being a dad, and for him to just kind of be hooked already is just one of life's really special moments for me. So long may it continue. And there's no research that would suggest that if you learn a sign language, it impacts on your speech or your spoken language development. As long as you have language capital, as long as you have language in you, that you know that this means table and you can say the word table, as long as you've got that in you, the way it comes out, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, that'll be my answer.
Thanks, Sean. And I know as well in British Sign Language, there's this idea or this use of sign names, isn't there? That's very particular to sign language. Can you tell us a bit more about that and how that works and how sign names are created or constructed?
Sure. So BSL has lots of reference points, and one of those things is a sign name. So a sign name is something that it represents who you are as a person, or it's a trait of yours. So rather than someone finger spelling your name, so for me, rather than someone going, "Oh, do you know that guy from Liverpool, Sean, Sean," and just having to finger spell all the time, they just have one sign, and people know that it's me. So with a bit of an explanation, so because I play the trumpet, my sign name is Sean. That's the sign for trumpet. When you are executing your sign name, you lip speak your name. I wouldn't lip speak trumpet. I wouldn't say my name is trumpet. I would say my name is Sean. Um, Liz, do you just want to hop in and tell us why your sign name is what it is?
Yes, so yeah, I agree. I say Lizzie. My sign name is that because my level 1 teacher gave it me on the first class. She went round the class and she said, "Oh, name what?" But she gave it to me because I'm from Manchester, and in Manchester, it's the sign associated with the name Elizabeth. So it just stuck, and yeah, Elizabeth. Although one deaf client did tell me once it's because I'm a lip speaker and I probably dribble, which I thought was quite funny. But no, it's not. It's because it's the Manchester sign linked to my name, Elizabeth, but shortened to Lizzie. So yeah.
For sure. And so there's other kind of like physical features. So Stephen Collins, who's a very, very good deaf actor in London, who does a lot of Shakespeare, actually, BSL, he has lots of freckles. So his sign name is Stephen. Um, Another pal of mine, Emily Howlett, if you think of the name Howl from a wolf, Howl. So the sign for wolf, Emily. Emily, and she's really feisty, and she really loves that. That's her sign name. Another pal of mine is obsessed with ice cream, so his sign name is Matthew Ice Cream. We could probably give Jules a sign name, Liz.
Should I be worried?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, very worried.
Okay.
So it's usually from a deaf person that kind of gives you the sign name. When we did musical Storyland, um, executive, you met Jen
Yeah.
Redmond, who's incredible. And we kind of gave her the sign name, if I remember correctly, Liz, it was Jay,
Yeah.
because she's the exec producer of the BBC Philharmonic. and the sign for conductor, the letter J, just kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
J. But yeah, so what's your do you have a favorite food, Jules? What's your job? What's your
I do have a favorite food. It is chocolate.
okay? So you could be Jules, the letter C, just under your chin, Jules.
Oh, I quite like that.
Yeah, Jules. Or do you have a particular hobby? Someone who I'm teaching, I teach level one BSL at the moment online, and one of my pupils is Amy. She loves yoga, Amy. So that's why there's someone called Ellie who loves cake. Um, yeah, there's stuff like that. So, is there a hobby as well as foods that we could?
Reading. I read a lot. Reading. What would
Ju-
that be?
Jules.
Okay. I like that too. They're both lovely. You'd have to choose.
I know. I think I know.
No pressure.
Do you prefer reading or do you have them both at the same time? Reading
I,
and
actually, I do. How did you guess?
I think that should be a pastime that everyone should take up. Reading, absolutely. Do you read off a Kindle or are you more like you like to feel the book?
Yeah, I like a book.
Or in that case, then I think we'll go with Jules, if that's okay for
It
reading.
is. Thank you. Thank you. That is lovely.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. Lovely. If anyone else wants me to give them a sign name, available for bookings, Instagram, get in touch. Be a pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. Um, so Lizzie, I just wanted to ask you a bit about being a BSL interpreter. So, for example, what does your working week look like? What sort of events or situations have you signed for? That kind of thing.
So I work full time as an interpreter. I used to be with the local council out and about for many years, but last year I changed and became an online interpreter. So I work for Sign Live and we are an on-demand service. So people have us on their mobile phone. They press a button and up pops an interpreter, which is really helping with the national shortage, I have to say, because you don't have to wait 2 weeks to be booked in. I also work part-time as a freelance interpreter, mostly for theatre and shows and concerts and things like that. And recently it's been panto season, which is one of my favourite signs ever. Slap of the thigh. Panto. So yeah, so I do an integrated panto every year with a colleague of mine, Claire, and we are in the show and this is the best job of the year, apart from obviously working with you, Sean. And we're both in it in full costume and we're in on the action and we're acting and signing and it's just a blast. And we've been doing it for 10 years now. And the good thing about being an integrated is, and Sean will know this, when you're a deaf theatre goer, or you're going to a concert or whatever, you sort of ushered into a certain area of the theatre so that you can watch the interpreter that's at the side of the stage, and it's a bit like this. Or captions is sometimes preferred, but still you have to be in a particular place. Whereas when it's integrated, the deaf audience is said to us, I can just sit wherever I want because I can see the whole thing in real time with the actors and things. So that's one of the I like that's sort of my fun side. Being an interpreter is a great job. You get to meet lots of different people. So yeah, I sort of fell into it, but I wouldn't change it for the world. I've done lots of exciting things. So yeah, it's amazing.
What Liz isn't telling you is that she does so many gigs for world famous musicians, I don't know if you want to tell them about Bruce Springsteen, Liz, or
No, I haven't done Bruce Springsteen, but I've done lots of others. Yeah, I work at a place in Halifax, and we have people. Yeah, we have Sting
Sting, that was
and
it. Sting.
Noel
So
Gallagher, and yeah, I did a concert with Sting. I've done a concert with him twice. He's such a gentleman, let me tell you. And he, just before he started to sing one of his songs, he asked me, he said, "Oh, what's your name?" And I said, "Oh, it's Lizzie." And he said, "Lizzie, this song is for you." And it was every little thing she does is magic. So that is now on my emails, or it should be, saying it's official. Sting said, "Every little thing I do is magic." So if somebody criticizes me, I'm like, hang on a minute. Every little thing I do is magic. So do one. So yeah, it's great fun. Yeah, I love it, and I get to work with some fantastic interpreters, and yeah, it's a small community interpreting, but it's very supportive, and yeah, it's a good profession to come into, but it's hard work. Yeah, but it's worth it.
talk about co-working with interpreters, Liz.
So, co-working with interpreters, we take turns because when you sign, it can be exhausting. And so we usually take turns each if the meeting's more than an hour. When we're doing concerts, we share because it's songs and we help each other out. It's important to be supportive of each other because it's like any profession. Um, it can be high demand. It can be you can go to one job and it's not what you expect. It can become very frustrating, can be very sad, sometimes in hospitals with very sad situations. But the beauty of it is we're here to provide communication and support, and the deaf community is very supportive of us. So yeah, it's really good, and it's a very worthwhile job. And I never expected that when I started this journey. But yeah, brilliant.
I think you've got to have the thickest skin to be an interpreter as well, because the interpreter pals that I've got told me about the times when deaf people have criticised the sign. Deaf people are great, don't get me wrong, but I have been in the room where, openly deaf people will criticise the interpreter, or um, sometimes like the deaf people might think, "Oh, you're here to provide communication. Can you just make this phone call for me?" and things like that, which is beyond what the booking was. Would you kind of agree, Liz, that you've got to have thick skin to be in the profession that you're in?
I think you've got to have a certain amount of thick skin to be in this profession. There are some challenging situations, as there are with any job. Um, I think sometimes deaf people can have a go at the interpreter, but often it's shoot the messenger. So it's not really you they're having a go at, it's the situation or the frustration that you're telling them. And of course, they're communicating with us. And as Sean knows, when you're interpreting, the deaf person looks at us, but they're addressing the hearing person, but they can't look at them the whole time. They have to look at us. So sometimes it can feel that way, but that's where you've got to have a good co-working network, and to be able to say to your co-worker after, "Oh, that didn't go well. Was it me?" And it's like, well, actually, they were having a go at us because they were frustrated with the hearing, lack of access, or they've been trying to get something done and they can't. I mean, Sean probably knows more about this than me, but for example, if a deaf person wants to phone a company, so many times the company refuses to talk to them because they're using an interpreter. But the law says you have to accept that call because we're independent. The person still has to go through security, GDPR, we get thrown that every day. And that just leads to frustration, and that's not accessible. Hearing people don't have that, but deaf people do every day, and that is why they get frustrated a lot of the time, in my experience. I mean, there are some people that might have a go at you, but like Sean says, it's job, but we're also in the middle. So sometimes we get it, but it's not targeted at us. It's actually somebody else. So, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Lizzie, something as you were talking, it really made me think about, you said a few things there. You obviously said the sort of what I would call, what I would term the more glamorous side, like getting to speak to Sting. Very exciting. But you also mentioned perhaps being in hospital, being in a difficult situation, helping or being with someone who's dealing with the everyday frustrations of life. And thank you for your answer, because you really explained that very well, I'm speaking as a hearing person, and obviously I see people who are signing on screen for TV production or whatever it is, and I would consider that to be the sting end of the situation. And actually you've really reminded me and made me think that there are all these other situations that a BSL interpreter and signer would be supporting with and being there for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Another question for Sean, which is, what led you into teaching and what different teaching roles have you had?
My mum. I remember she was an English teacher at a really rough school in North Liverpool, in Bootle. It was such a joy to see my mum teach. You know, like when you were off school, if you had a baker day when you were younger, if you had a training day, and I think it still happens now. But back then, you could go into work, or you could go into school with your mum if she was a teacher there, or a TA, and I would just sit at the back of the room and just see my mum transform into this, not actress, maybe a bit of an actress, but it was just the way she engaged these skinheads, as we called them back then, um, and just got them enthused in Shakespeare and the death of a salesman and the poetry of John Donne. And I was just blown away by the relationships that my mum had with them. And so I I was able then, by virtue of being with my mum on those days and then going in over the holidays as well, my mum introduced me to her colleagues, who then let me sit in and watch them teach. And so from a very early age, I was able to see what works. I was able to see what doesn't work. And I was able to see how children react to certain bits of what an adult is trying to get them to do. So that was like the initial inspiration. And then when I was in primary school, I started trumpet lessons. Um, and I carried on trumpet lessons until I was, well, pretty much till the end of school, and into university. But the trumpet cornet teacher that I had in secondary school, his name was Bob Dean, and he is probably the reason other than my mum, that I'm a teacher today, because he really saw me, and he saw the potential. When I talk about the best thing for deaf children is to have people around them that believe in them and want to see them thrive, he was the first person that really kind of gave me the belief and the conviction that I could be a good musician. And so he got me into the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain, of which now I'm on the staff for. And he taught me about qualifying to be a teacher, actually. He used to say, go and get your piece of paper, go and get your teaching qualification, and then the world's your oyster. Because I was like, I want to go and play on the ships, play on the cruises. Because there was some friends of mine who were able to do that. And Bob was just adamant. He said, I know it's really tempting, but once you've got that piece of paper, you can go wherever you want. And luckily for me, I've got the PGCE and the mandatory qualification of a teacher of the deaf. And I've been able to work everywhere really. So I've worked as a I've worked everywhere. I've worked as a secondary school teacher. I was the only music teacher, and that was actually in the same school as my mum. To start with, yeah, in that North Liverpool school in Bootle, and that taught me a lot about being a teacher very quickly, and also kind of coming to terms with my own deafness because I couldn't hear the kid at the back of the room. So that was an interesting challenge for me to kind of accept that and to kind of get the kids on side, just being open about it. So I've been a classroom teacher in secondary. I've been a teacher in primary as a teacher of the deaf. I've worked in a school for the deaf in Birmingham, Longwell School for Deaf Children, which is a primary school. Um, I've worked as a workshop leader, teaching music to deaf children, and I still do that now. I teach BSL. I teach the level 1 signature course. Uh, I intermittently have one-to-one instrumental pupils who are learning how to play brass instruments. Um, I worked for the National Deaf Children's Society. It's called the Purple Bus, the listening bus, and it's a mobile classroom. Do you know about this, Liz?
Yes.
Yeah. It drives around the UK and it parks in school car parks, and the kids come onto the bus, and it's a mobile classroom. It's got an interactive screen, massive screen, which we do the PowerPoints from, and we teach deaf awareness. We teach deaf identity, technology for deaf people, and that was incredible. I don't do that anymore, sadly, because I work full time as a teacher of the deaf now, as a peripatetic. So I have children on my caseload from age 0 to age 25. Massive um, uh, spectrum, and I love the variety of that. So I've been in lots of positions of teaching and learning, and I'm never the same person in each of those scenarios. I always am respectful, I'd like to think, and I always try and make sure that I'm going at the learner's pace and setting enough challenge. I think that's the biggest challenge for us, to set an appropriate challenge for the children. Um, but in everything that I do, I try and bring, because it is, I think it's only with deaf children that I work with now, in different situations, in different scenarios. I first and foremost am a deaf man, and wanting to, I'll turn up at a workshop and I'm knackered, but there's a bigger calling, and I think once we find our own big calling, life just seems to flow. Everything just seems to go in that direction. There's no pull for me. I know that that's what I'm kind of put on this earth to do, I think. Um, and people seem to be kind of okay with that, which is cool. So yeah, so Mum was the initial inspiration, and I love ringing her and telling her about the various successes that I have. That's a really nice thing that I'm able to do. Um, and that's all. It's just a lovely thing that me and my mum have. I have two younger sisters. They're not teachers. They could be if they wanted to be. They just chose not to. So it is very special with me and my mum. Yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you, Sean. I also wanted to ask, you mentioned there that you're now a peripatetic teacher and you go from 0 to 25 young people. So do you go to different education settings to do that?
Yeah.
So you might go to an early years setting, for example. So can you describe what that's like when you are in an early years setting? What
So
do
when I'm in an early years setting, it's not really with the child that I do the most work. It's with the professionals.
you...
Deaf awareness training that needs to happen. Do they know how to change the battery on the hearing aid and things like that?
Mm.
Um, and a lot of work goes into the parents as well. And it's pretty special when they meet me as a deaf man. All of these like worries, and one parent used the word grief when they were told that their child was deaf. Um, they have a teacher of the deaf that's working with them who has a Scouse accent, who is sometimes welcomed in Leeds, actually. But and you know, I'll tell them about me because I think authenticity is absolutely critical in getting alongside these parents, as you know yourself. So I'll talk about my own experiences, um, and like I say, I think just time and space with parents. So yeah, I do home visits. I go into early years settings. I go to pupil referral units, PRUs,
Mm.
uh, primary schools, secondary schools, post 16. There's a communication college as well that I used to go into, not in Leeds, but in Doncaster. So, um, yeah, it's about building capacity at the schools and settings that I go into and kind of keeping an eye on them on the stuff that they do when I'm not there. That's
Mm.
the biggest challenge. The kids are fine. The kids are great. For me, it's about creating the right environment in each of the settings and empowering the professionals that I'm working with. Um, and then talking about speech development. If sound can't come into here,
Mm.
it's not going to come out of there. That forms the premise of everything that I do, and everything that I say some other things as well, sometimes, but that's pretty much it. Everything that I do and say to parents and professionals is centered around that.
Mm.
So maintaining the hearing equipment, teaching sign language, um, talking to the child about deaf identity, things like that. Um, and yeah, just raising expectations really.
Mm.
And it's teachers' paying conditions. It is a teacher's salary, but it doesn't feel like a job at all. And I'm very lucky to have the job that I've got. Yeah.
Thanks, Sean. We're coming up to our last question. And I wanted to just end with your music, Sean. I wanted to end with asking you, what are some of your most memorable performances as a trumpeter?
Gosh, memorable performances. Buckingham Palace has got to be up there. I was part of a BBC series called Goldie's Band by Royal Appointment, and it took 12 disadvantaged 20 somethings and put them together on a residential music course type compositional course thing with Guy Chambers, who wrote Robbie Williams' songs, um, and Goldie himself, the rapper, the DJ. But Buckingham Palace was incredible. Um, Westminster Abbey, that was something for the Royal College of Midwives. Lots of performances with the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain, in places like the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, Snape Maltings. Um, but I think the very best memorable performance was, well, there's two. I think because musical Storyland was so groundbreaking, I think, and accessibility was at the heart of everything that we did. It wasn't necessarily the music, it was more what the music represented, being played by a deaf musician on that platform, um, as a part of musical Storyland. So that meant the most. But I'll never forget with the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain, I think it was one of my first performances with them. We were doing a piece called Meditation Just As I Am by a Salvation Army composer called Wilfred Heaton. And it's, I don't know the words to the song, but it's based on a hymn, Just As I Am Without a Plea. I'll send you an email with the lyrics. But the message of the music, just as I am.
Mm.
There's no histrionics here. There's no kind of added stuff. There was just this moment in the piece where it went really. My mum and dad were in the audience, and the conductor, his name was Bramwell Tovey, who's not with us anymore. He was the conductor of the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. hands down the best musician I've ever met. And his choreography, the way he conducted, inspired me to take up conducting in university, and I won the conducting prize. Not that I could hear anything, but because my choreography and my handshapes were so on point, I think that won me the award. Um, and actually, I want to teach deaf children how to conduct, because if you think of handshapes and body language and eye contact, the principles of conducting are the same principles in BSL. But that's probably for another podcast or another conversation. Anyway, so at this piece, I think we were at the RNCM. We were playing this music and it went really quiet, and we'd rehearsed this all week, but for some reason in the performance, it just really stood out to me, this moment where the basses at the back of the band just had this murmur. And Bram Tovey had this way of shaping music, shaping sounds with his hands. And he just kind of brought in the other parts of the band, the trombones, the tenor horns, and the euphoniums. And to his left, just kind of where I was sat, there was this moment where there was all of this build-up and excitement. And at the climax of this phrase, he just did this sweeping gesture. And we came in, and the whole band just, the sound, that whether it was the acoustics or whether it was just like we were all knackered after a week of rehearsal, the sound just went whap, and it kind of went right through my body from my feet all the way up to my chest. And it was just that moment of, this is what music is, and why wouldn't you want to give this to deaf children? Why wouldn't you want to give this experience to other people? But that moment, it was a surge. It was a really special spirit and a power that kind of came through me, and I started crying. And then my mum and dad were crying in the audience as well, because I think they could see that their deaf son was was achieving something that maybe they thought. It's a bit emotional telling you this, but that was probably the best musical experience. But for what music stood for in music storyland played by myself, I think that was special for a very different reason. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. The way you described that moment, I felt you described it. I felt tingles as you described that. That was quite something.
All right, good, good. It's
Um,
about music, isn't it? It's the power of music, eh?
yeah. And I should also take this opportunity to say that you mentioned musical Storyland there, and that was what our previous podcast that you and Lizzie and Jen were on together, we talked about. It was all about really musical Storyland, and everyone can go back and listen to that in our back catalogue whenever they want to. That was our last question. I just want to say, Sean and Lizzie, it's been an absolute delight, just like it was last time. Thank you so, so much for joining us again. This possibly won't be the last time, because it's very lovely to chat with
Thank
you
you.
again. Thank you.